Hello, welcome back to another episode of Made for Makers. Today is day 6 and we'll be talking about how I learned. I think the most significant tool of learning was my computer, specifically the internet. We are in my room today and not in the workshop for a very simple reason. While I do learn a lot by making and by trying out and by experimenting and by destroying a project and occasionally succeeding in completing a project, that is a huge part of my learning experience, but I also learn a lot by watching others make on YouTube, for example. A huge inspiration and source of learning for me was Bob Claggett from I Like to Make Stuff. I had the great pleasure to meet him at Maker Central last year and the year before. I managed to spend some time with him and talk about making, and generally, first of all, brilliant guy, and secondly, a very good maker and a very good source of learning. So I think Bob Claggett was one of the people who really pushed me into starting to make stuff. Of course, after I started making, and then I sort of verged into leatherworking, and that is where my second sort of influential and inspirational person came into play, and that would be Richard or Magnus from Dark Horse Workshop. Brilliant leather worker. His videos are very demonstrational. They show you every step of the way as he does it, without it being an instruction manual. If I'm explaining myself properly. So I highly recommend either one of them, of course. Now, these people highlighted not only the technique and the skills that you need to make, but also the mindset. Especially Bob Claggett, where he often says that he's just having fun in the workshop, or that he has never properly learned how to do something, but he's trying it out anyway because it's interesting to try and because it's fun to try, and that is something that I share in sentiment when I'm in the workshop. So something like that is I connect with something like that. With that kind of mentality. As I said earlier, a huge chunk of my learning is, of course, attributed to trial and error, by trying and making stuff out in the garage. I've never had any formal training when it comes to making, of course. I know that in certain countries, like for example the USA, you have like workshop classes or woodshop classes or something like that. We don't have that kind of thing over here, or at least we didn't have while I was growing up. And arts and crafts, while we did have art classes, we never actually had crafting classes. I think nowadays they're a little bit on the rise. But I never grew up in a decade, or at least 2 decades or 3, where making and sort of handiwork in general was very highly promoted for several reasons. So something like this, I'm very grateful to have the internet for. The internet really helped me find whatever resources I need to get started, obviously from buying tools to learning techniques. Also, I think it managed to pull in together our collective experience and whatever little experience I contribute to the whole, global phenomenon of making, or whatever you want to call it. One last thing I would like to add is that makers in general, traditionally, we have our own bubble, so to speak. We have our own workshop, we have our own set of skills, our own expertise, and basically we tend to keep to ourselves, because whatever we do, whatever we'd like to do, we can probably try it and do it and accomplish it and succeed in a matter of a couple of tries, if not at the first time. So these kinds of maker gatherings are also very important. I have had the luck to and the good fortune to visit Maker Central twice, in 2018 and 2019, and they were, I think, the best events of the years by far. Getting all those makers together from all across the world, it was a great and beautiful thing, and I was so happy to meet so many great people. I wish to mention them all, but it would take me more than an hour, I think. But yes, I mean, these kinds of events bring these people together, bring makers together, which is very important in my opinion. Especially as I said, we tend to keep to ourselves, But in these kinds of occasions, we tend to brainstorm with each other, apart from having fun, and socializing and that sort of thing. But we get to learn a lot from each other, and by watching the panels and by hearing others talk about the issues that they have in the workshop, for example, or that sort of thing. So to summarize, the three main sources of information, sources of learning for me are other makers, especially on the internet, maker events such as Maker Central or Maker Fair, that sort of thing, and finally trial and error. But that works for me, and this works for a lot of other people. So as I always say, your mileage may vary, so you might have other ways to learn, like for example reading books only, for example, but that's really up to you. I think it's very important that you find what works for you and you stick to that. But there's definitely no harm in trying some other technique. So feel free to experiment, of course, and I really hope that at least this video, if you are maybe considering to start making something or get into a particular craft or trade, I hope that at least this gives you a little bit more encouragement to go ahead and try, because you're definitely not alone in this great adventure, and there are so many other people who know so much and they are ready to share the information with you. So thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Made for Makers, and I hope to see you tomorrow with the next topic. As always, stay safe and keep making.